place, God is also immutable in his character or attributes. God shows different aspects of his character at different times, sometimes expressing mercy, sometimes expressing wrath, but his ever consistent character or his eternal nature never changes. Listen to the way the writer of Hebrews spoke of Christ's eternal nature in Hebrews chapter 1, verses 10 through 12. In the beginning, O Lord, you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment. You will roll them up like a robe. Like a garment they will be changed. But you remain the same, and your years will never end. And as James chapter 1 verse 17 says, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. Our God does not change. On the contrary, his character always remains the same. Unfortunately, we live in a day when many Christians have doubted the consistency of God's character. They act as if he has one set of attributes early in the Bible and then another at a later time. I can remember as a 6-year-old child hearing my Sunday school teacher teach us about Joshua's battle at Jericho. When she'd finished telling us the story, she looked at us all around the room and said, "Boys and girls, God was very mean in the Old Testament. He even wanted children to die back then. But God has changed now. In the New Testament, he loves everybody. Aren't you glad you live in the New Testament rather than in the Old Testament?" And of course, we were all very glad for this. None of us wanted to be killed like the children of Jericho. Now, as well-meaning as my Sunday school teacher was, she had made a serious mistake. God's character has not changed since the Old Testament. On the contrary, he is just as full of judgment in the New Testament as in the Old Testament, and he is just as loving in the Old Testament as in the New Testament. God's character has always been and always will be precisely as it is right now. He is unchanging. The immutability of God's attributes also gives us reason to believe that the Old Testament is relevant for our lives today. Despite the fact that on the surface, many of God's outward actions in the Old Testament look very different from his actions in the New Testament, we must affirm with the teaching of Scripture that God's character has never changed. Every action he took in the Old Testament reflected his character, and because his character has not changed a bit, we can be confident that his actions in the New Testament period are also harmonious with his eternal nature. If Old Testament believers and New Testament believers have the same God with the same attributes, we should expect to see similarities between the ways God related to Old Testament believers and the way he relates to New Testament believers. And these similarities make the Old Testament relevant for our lives. Now, in the third place, throughout the Bible, God is also unchanging in his covenant promises. Without fail, God will fulfill everything he covenanted to be and to do for his people. Now, we need to be careful here as well. Many times in Scripture, God threatens and offers things to people which he does not bring about. But threats and offers are not covenant promises. Covenant promises are those things God has sworn to do, and these covenant oaths are unfailing. As Hebrews chapter 6 verse 17 reads, "Because God wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose very clear to the heirs of what was promised, he confirmed it with an oath." God is immutable in his covenants. In Genesis chapter 9 verse 16, God promised that whenever he saw the bow in the sky, he would remember his everlasting covenant with Noah and never again destroy the world with a flood. 3 times in Genesis chapter 17, God promised that his covenant with Abraham would be an everlasting covenant. And in 1 Chronicles chapter 16, verses 15 through 18, David called to mind God's unending covenant to the patriarchs to give Israel the promised land. In 2 Samuel chapter 23, verse 5, David mentioned that God had made an everlasting covenant with him regarding his line's claim to Israel's throne. And although the failures of Israel, Judah, and the house of David led to the exile, God always kept his covenant with them. In Ezekiel chapter 16, verses 59 and 60, we read these words, "This is what the sovereign Lord says. I will deal with you as you deserve, because you have despised my oath by breaking the covenant. Yet I will remember the covenant I made with you in the days of your youth, and I will establish an everlasting covenant with you." We have to admit that from time to time it appears that in the New Testament God has forgotten or set aside some of his promises. But the reality is this: when we understand Scripture properly, remembering that God does not change, we will find that every covenant promise is or will be fulfilled. For this reason, we have good reason to believe that the Old Testament can be applied in profitable ways to us as followers of Christ in the New Testament age. God made many promises to Old Testament believers, and we can be sure that in the New Testament, he is keeping those promises.